Another break between raid videos for more news. It really seems like a lot's going on with Guild Wars at the moment. I guess the devs are rallying around at the start of 2018 to establish what they're doing. And we've had several forum posts on a couple of different topics. Some older, but most of them newer, specifically revolving around the upcoming patch, probably next Tuesday, which is widely expected to be balance. So I don't know about you guys, but increasingly as the months go by, I'm getting more and more excited about balance. Maybe it's just because of my involvement in PvP at the moment, but there's a lot of hotly anticipated things. And I also think in general, the Grace of the Land change, the changes to 10-man buffs in several places across the game, I think they've made more interesting traits and cool decisions lately. So obviously we'll do a video on the full thing later, but this is looking like a big one because already the devs are talking about some of the stuff, and I guess we'll jump straight in. So first of all, there was a described change that's coming to Confusion and Regeneration. Now I don't have a screenshot or anything for you guys here because I can't quite remember whether the devs posted this on forums or Reddit, and I don't have time to dig too much. But they were non-specific about these changes, but I think we can guess what they're going to be. Now first of all, on the topic of Confusion, Confusion is getting unloaded extremely heavily in PvP right now by mirages, both sword mirages and particularly though axe mirages. I personally don't have too much a problem with it as long as the Confusion unloading skills were better telegraphed. My main problem with mirage in the game right now is to fight against them. They've got really subtle, lame, almost unpredictable tells, as opposed to say Holosmith that has really meaty damage but very obvious what you can dodge and when and what's coming. So that's what I'd rather see change about all this Confusion stuff, but it looks like the devs are going to do something. I'm guessing, and this is what I want more than anything, that the patch will revert Confusion something to be more like what it was at launch. So at launch, Confusion never used to do passive damage. It used to only do damage when you activated skills. That got changed to do much less on activate and then just constantly tick away in the background to make it a more viable thing for PvE, where you could be frequently fighting mobs that don't really execute skills very fast in the first place, and it made Confusion kind of bad. So I liked the normalization from a PvE standpoint, but it also made the Confusion a lot more boring and a lot less accented. Because this is mostly a PvP-oriented thing, I'm thinking they might be embracing more PvE, PvP, world versus world splitting, and revert the changes for PvP. So that's one idea. Another idea is they could go for a really big rework and make it a burner condition. And by that, I don't mean, you know, bump the damage up and make it like burning. What I mean is turn it into a little bit like blind, where it rips after actions are undertaken. So imagine a blind that could stack intensity, but once it ticks on you, it disappears. Either of these ideas would make, especially Mesma playstyle and utilization of that condition, a lot closer to what I loved about Mesma in the first game, which some of you guys might remember. I actually used to main before then swapping off in Guild Wars 2 because I felt it changed so much gameplay-wise. I don't know, a revert like that might be very cool, and I really do think that's a PvP-focused thing. Moving on, we got Regeneration. Regeneration, I can't really imagine what they're doing. There's some really profound stuff you could do with Regen, which in my opinion is the most boring of all condies and boons in the game. And there's been lots of ideas and proposals in the past to make it stack intensity, but have diminishing returns and all this stuff. I don't know whether the devs are going to go that far. Probably a low-hanging fruit with it, though, is the duration issue. If you guys don't know what this is, basically, if you already have Regeneration on you and somebody else then applies it on you too, the game will overwrite the previously existing stack with the new Regeneration, as long as the person who applied it the second time has more boon duration. So basically, if there's two people trying to put Regeneration on you, the guy with the most boon duration wins. And you might think, well, that's a really good idea, WP, because the most boon duration means that you get the most utilization of it. Not really, though, because it also scales on the healing power. So what this is practically meant over in PvE and WoW versus well, in fact, everywhere, really. But especially in raids, if you think about it, with Signet of Inspiration being popped all the time, what's it meant is like the Chronos are overwriting more powerful Druid regen and stuff. It's a weird artifice, and I think it's an easy thing the devs could change. Hopefully they understand is a problem. People have been talking about it for ages now. And so yeah, that's what I think is more likely to happen with Regeneration. As always, I'm trying to hold my expectations back a little bit, because if they do too many dramatic things all at once, it could be, you know, a bit ridiculous for the game. And speaking of dramatic things, there certainly are some. So let's talk about the next thing, which had a full forum post. I really like this. I'm very much into Paradox games at the moment. I love the way that Paradox handle disseminating information about their upcoming patches, and they do a lot of it through walls of text on their forums. Guild Wars kind of tapered off of that during the Heart of Thorns days, Living World Season 3, ended up actually using Reddit as more of a vehicle for spreading information about the game than anything else, much to forum goers' chagrin. Well, here we've had a lot of forum-based stuff, and I'd like to see more of it. Because, again, it kind of reminds me of the way that Paradox do things. So, let's talk about a post from Gale on behalf of Robert G. So, Robert G, famed guy that did the... he's a member of the Balance team. He had jurisdiction over the Reaper, the Chronomancer, and several of the Path of Fire specs as well. I actually have an interview with him on my channel. So here's what he has to say in the first post, which is about a big change to Mesmas in general, called Shattering the Status Quo. And this is pretty large. It's to do with illusions. So as a Mesma, you have access to illusions, right? And there are two types of illusions. Clones, which look just like you, are super squishy, and are mostly there just to deceive your opponents and then be shattered later. You've got clones. And then there's also phantasms too, which aren't quite so squishy, and actually execute, you know, powerful abilities, but don't auto-attack. The Mirage was a specialization about improving play with clones, but didn't really touch phantasms too much. And the class overall, this play between shattering and using phantasms is about to be turned on its head, and Robert explains it very well here. So he says, today I want to give you all the heads up on some important changes coming to the Mesma in the upcoming update. These changes affect phantasms, which are a core part of the Mesma profession mechanic, illusions, and as a result will have a large effect on how the Mesma profession plays after the update. In one sentence, these changes can be summed up as: phantasms become clones after their initial attack. Wow. So, he says, here are the specific details of how it works. Number 1, phantasms no longer persist indefinitely. Instead, a phantasm will attack once and then automatically be destroyed. If interrupted during its attack, then the phantasm will also be destroyed. Number 2, phantasms can be targeted by skills and can take damage while alive. Phantasms can be destroyed by damaging skills before they finish their attack. Number 3, a destroyed phantasm will be replaced with a clone based on your current weapon set. This clone will spawn regardless of how the phantasm was destroyed. The clone is spawned at the location of the phantasm at the time it was destroyed. And finally, shatter skills no longer destroy phantasms, and phantasms no longer count towards the maximum illusion limit. This is a pretty large gameplay shift, so I wanted to talk a little bit about why we're doing this and what it means for your Mesma gameplay. So that is a lot to chew. Any Mesma players out there will know this. I've got a lot of thoughts. I'll let Robert finish with the post before I give some of mine and give you my impressions as to what this will feel like. So first of all, the subheading here with a lovely pun or wordplay, which all of these will be, the illusion of choice. Mesmas have always had a tension between clones and phantasms. This tension was designed into the profession when the game launched. The idea was that shattering clones would be good for burst damage, while leaving phantasms active would be an option for sustained damage. Choosing whether or not to shatter was intended to be one of the core decision points for those playing Mesma. However, we've discovered, as the game has developed and evolved, that providing this tension usually ends up removing the incentive to use the profession's core mechanic and leads to more passive gameplay. This can be seen in a lot of optimized builds for Mesmas involving summoning 3 phantasms and then auto-attacking for extended periods of time in order to avoid destroying the phantasms by using another illusion skill. So you can tell a lot of this is raid oriented. That kind of gameplay really doesn't factor into open world where things die very frequently, personal story where things die very frequently, PvP or world versus world. This is really something born of raids. But we know what they're talking about. One of the early Mirage builds was a Condi build that involved summoning, pistol phantasms and then using the sand shards. We obviously do have an Infinite Horizon version that you can run nowadays, but also even I've done a video talking about Power Mesma, which was the ultimate easy build. It was literally summon power, phantasms on the sword offhand, and then just attack and use Blade Frenzy and stuff, and use mantras to support people. Extremely passive, easy gameplay. And I guess they're afraid that would be too boring, and they are trying to cull that away, which I know a lot of people will, fundamentally, philosophically believe in. So let's move on. They say also mirrored gameplay. In the past, we've made some corrections to professions with this type of gameplay, as seen with the changes to the warrior's adrenal health and berserker's power traits, which previously rewarded saving adrenaline over spending it. And they're right, we've actually seen a lot of changes like this go to the game in subtle ways over the years. I think there was an NG change quite recently. I remember actually some necro changes too. If you remember the old way that vampirism and blood magic and stuff worked, it basically meant you could never go into Shroud, you could never use your main mechanic because you couldn't actually lifesteal while in those places. We've seen a lot of this, okay? So they're saying here, phantasms as a mechanic are entirely based on discouraging the use of shatter skills, and as a result, correcting this has touched a large number of skills and traits that it did for Warrior. However, our primary goal with these changes is the same, to create more active profession gameplay loop that rewards spending profession resources over saving them. For Mesma, this means the play patterns which revolve around generating and shattering clones, while phantasms can be summoned for utility, burst damage, or some combination of the two. Power Return, he says it, as the name of a skill in Guild Wars 1, I think the name of a trait or something maybe in the second game. Oh no, it's just the name of one of the mantras, right? Because the power level of Phantasm skills and traits usually assume that the Phantasm will not be destroyed immediately, we've done an extensive balance pass on all skills and traits related to Phantasms, as well as several related traits and skills. We've also taken this opportunity to re-evaluate some of the underperforming Phantasms to rework them into more impactful skills. For example, the Phantasmal Defender skill now taunts foes instead of buffing allies, and the Phantasmal Warlock skill summons 2 phantasms, each with a new attack. So yeah, remember, one of the classification of utilities are illusions themselves, and so the old Phantasmal Defender applied protection to us, and also like halved or reduced the damage that allies were taking. I guess they weren't happy with that at all. Like, I don't know why under the new system it couldn't apply that, but adding taunt on there, I suppose, is a fun thing also. So finally, they say Phantasmal feedback. While we're committed to making this change to Phantasms, as we feel it will improve the gameplay of the health of the Mesma profession, we also recognise there will be an adjustment period where players need to adapt to these changes. This is one of the largest changes we've undertaken for a single profession, short of creating new specialisations, and we realise that it may be jarring to some players. We'll be watching the feedback on our official forums after these changes go live and make adjustments where necessary. And then they say, I'm sure you're wondering about Chronomancers and Alacrity, because a lot of your Alacrity comes from Phantasms. Well, for that, we've got another post. So just before I skip over and talk about Alacrity, let's talk about this change here. I think this is a good idea. It wasn't something I expected, but looking at Mesma gameplay, I mean, it was even just last weekend, I think, that on stream I was playing a Mesma, and I was audibly frustrated because I didn't know whether my Scepter auto attacks were going to generate a clone that would get rid of a key Phantasm that I wanted up instead. You know, there's just kind of these weird, niggling, sort of specific things you have to keep in mind as a Mesma, and not in a fun way. This isn't kind of fun complexity, it's just fiddly. And so I do agree with the change. I am looking forward to that all being ironed out, because that just won't exist anymore. So I guess the way that it's going to feel is a bit like Spirit Weapons do for the Guardian right now, though I don't remember if Spirit Weapons can be killed, but they're going to spawn, they're going to do their thing and disappear. So there's a lot of fun little things we can consider now, like a ranged damage Phantasm will turn into a clone after it's finished its ability, and the clone will appear staying at range, while something like a Greatsword Phantasm is going to spawn next to your enemy, do the ability, and then the clone is going to be over there as well. So that'll be curious. I think another fun thing as the Mesma is going to be, you want to use a Shatter, but you don't have any clone generation, but you do have Phantasm generation. So using the Phantasm and waiting for that precise moment where it turns into the clone afterwards, so that then you can finally shatter. I think getting the timing on that might be a fun aspect of playing the class now. So there are these little things. I'm extremely curious about traits like the new Phantasm ramp trait, a trait that increases the strength of your Phantasms as they continue to execute attacks or gain might. I really liked that trait. I liked the ramp that was on there. I thought it was really fun. And now, obviously, the entire idea behind that trait, which is fairly new, by the way, that's just gone. So I wonder if that will be re-rolled, if they can emulate that experience in some other way. Is it going to be we gain rolling additional strength every time we use a Phantasm, but we only have a limited time to continue juggling stacks? No, that's just going to have to change. And then there's other stuff, like there's a lot of places of Mesma that's, hey, your illusions get a bit tankier. Does that really matter now that we're basically just playing with clones? I mean, Phantasms, they say, can be attacked, but is anybody really going to want to run a Signet that makes your, 2-second lifetime Phantasm a little bit tankier? I don't know. As it's passive, I don't know. So there's a lot of stuff there. Could horrendously break the class and be really boring and horrible. It depends how well the devs have thought about this. And I think mainly for PvE, as one of the biggest risks and concerns is Power Mesma will have nothing unless this Phantasm damage is insane to make up for it, or all of the auto attacks get massive buffs. So I wonder how the devs will, end up planning that. It's going to be a big list, I think, when the Mesma changes are announced, definitely. So that's the first post. Now, the second post is actually much more interesting for the whole game. It's still fairly Mesma related, and Robert G is again going to give us the story and the details here on the forums, but it's about Alacrity. So, one of the ways we give a lot of Alacrity out at the moment, perma Alacrity, is the Chronomancer will summon 3 shield Phantasms, and they will continue attacking and pulsing the Alacrity out. That's not going to be a thing anymore, obviously. So the devs are going to be changing that. So here's the second post. Alacrity, a time for change. More wordplay here. And so, just to be clear as well, one of the things I've loved about recent balance and that the devs have been clearly angling for is killing the raid mirror comp. I really like this idea. Obviously, we've got 10 slots in a raid and 9 professions in the game. I've been a big believer that all 9 could be represented in an ideal raid composition. If you do that, that's probably going to have the highest representation of gameplay diversity, and also it's going to be the most inclusive way to run the game. Everyone and every profession that someone might have picked, 50 hours ago when they first picked up Guild Wars 2, they're not being punished for playing something that has no place in the meta right now. Mirror comp has slowly been dismantled over the past 12 months, and I think in quite intelligent ways. They've made targeted changes to Grace of the Land. They've looked at banners. They've looked at distortion share and why both subgroups often have a Chronomancer or just a Mesma, I guess, from that perspective. They've looked at the role of might and 10-man might sharers and kind of this PS idea. So one of the last big things that still stands is Alacrity. This unique buff that Chronos and Renegades can put out, or I guess just Revenants in general can put out, that reduces your skill cooldown. Really, going back to the launch of Heart of Thorns, are ballsy things for the devs to have done. I recall blog posts before Guild Wars 2 came out, where they talked about how skill reduction stuff would never come into this game, because they did it in Guild Wars 1 and it made balance too difficult to deal with, and yet there it was in Heart of Thorns. It was once upon a time 66%, it was halved to 33%, and in this patch, it's going to be going through several other changes, including, yes, another potency reduction. So let's talk about it, and the way that the devs frame it has actually got very little, if anything, to do with mirror comp. They seem to be talking about it more just because of the Phantasm change. Maybe that's because they want to avoid the mirror comp debates that go about, but so here we get it, right? A lack of Alacrity. When we first started making changes to Phantasms, we quickly realized that the new system would have a huge impact on Alacrity uptime for Chronos, due to the changes to the Phantasmal Avenger. We were actually okay with this, since the whole point of the Phantasm update is to make Mesma play more engaging, because as those who've played Chrono will know, it's not necessarily always the most engaging of experiences. However, we didn't want to leave a huge gap in the duration of Alacrity uptime for Chronos. At first, we tried increasing the amount of Alacrity provided by the Avengers to compensate for the lower uptime, but we weren't happy with this solution. The amount of Alacrity uptime had to be pretty high to compensate for the limited uptime of the Phantasms, and the change still meant that Alacrity application relied on an NPC entity. Moving some Alacrity onto the other shield skill, the Tides of Time, helped a little bit, but it wasn't quite enough either. So they say Boon of Recharge. After some discussion, we decided that in addition to replacing quickness with Alacrity on Tides of Time, we would also change Alacrity into a boon. So the skill 5 has Alacrity now, and Alacrity is a boon. Originally, Alacrity was built outside of the boon and condition system in order to make it feel like a unique buff just for the Chronos of that time, right? But obviously, we have Revenants using it nowadays too. But as its use became more prevalent, to the point that it now enjoys nearly 100% uptime in certain game modes, we felt that the boon system was a better place for it to live. By being a part of the boon system, It works better with the concentration stats, and it has more counters and interactions throughout the game. I love this. I love what they're saying. I've thought it should be a boon for a long time. So when they're talking about concentration, they're talking about boon duration. So it now is going to have variable lengths that it can be applied. And counters interactions, you can now steal Alacrity, you can now flip Alacrity into a Condi, you can now rip Alacrity. That's not obviously so relevant for raids, though it kind of is, and I'll touch on that in just a second. In World vs. World and PvP, that's going to be really interesting. I like the idea of this becoming a boon. It did function basically in every way as a boon. I think the only ways that people might be a bit upset about this are the Chronomancer purists who think it should only be on Chrono, but I think they've probably already had to come to terms with the fact that it's not a Chrono-only thing anyway, since Rev started getting it on its versions of support. So, to go on with the post here a little bit, Time Distortion. With the conversion to a boon, we decided to lower the amount of recharge speed Alacrity provides from 33 to 25. So that's, you know, it was once upon a time 66, now it's 25. I've seen some people online suggesting that the devs just hate Mesma and need to keep nerfing it and nerfing it and nerfing it. But at the end of the day, Alacrity is extremely strong, and even at 33, I think it was still extremely strong. A lot of people only value the strength of Alacrity based on how much extra DPS it can give you, but it's much more than that. It allows you to CC faster, it allows you to heal faster, it allows you to use key stun breaks and whatnot faster. Everything improves and becomes easier when you have Alacrity. It's kind of insane. And since so many, we'll have a lot more easy access to long Alacrity now because we can manipulate it with concentration. I think that's okay. And the devs say as much. They say, we chose to lower this value because at 33%, we felt it was a little too powerful compared to other boons, and that easier uptime due to interactions with traits and the concentration stat should be met with a small decrease in power. And that's another point too, unifying it as a boon with the others. You know, to compare the value of 1 second of Alacrity versus 1 second of Regeneration is quite nuts. So, then there's also a really wonderful thing here too. They say, for those who prefer Alacrity with a bit more punch, we've updated the Chronomancer trait, Improved Alacrity, which now increases the potency of Alacrity while decreasing the duration of incoming Alacrity for the Chrono only. I love the sound of that trait. I can't quite remember how Grandmaster traits are set up for Chrono, but that really feels like it could be a Grandmaster tier thing. And I think this was very smart, because looking back at the old nerf from 66 to 33, there are a lot of complaints from Chronos who weren't interested in raids and weren't interested in the application of sharing it, but they felt that the Chronomancer had been designed to have lots of very long cooldowns because Alacrity was baked into it. And then the 66 to 33 nerf, without being compensated on recharges with everything else, somehow felt a little bit bitter. Well, this trait is, you know, something for people who might feel that way again. They haven't given specific numbers. I wonder whether it's just going to, you know, the trait will put you back to 33, or the trait could be even really powerful, and the trait could put you even higher than that, put it up to 50 or something, you know, closer to its original implementation. But again, that's for the Chrono only. You won't be able to share out the stronger Alacrity, and it will last less on you. But that could be good, and I think that could unlock some really interesting gameplay. Exactly the kind of thing that, flavor-wise, I think traits should be doing in the game. So, then one final section, it says, clocking in soon. As with Phantasms, we have also done a pass on skills and traits that grant or interact with Alacrity. You'll find Alacrity in some unexpected places, such as the Thieves' Stolen skill, Consume Plasma, and on the condition conversion list for skills like Contemplation of Purity. We expect that there will be an adjustment period, but we think that these changes will be positive overall for Alacrity use throughout the game, while allowing Chronomancers to maintain their current levels of Alacrity in a group. And then they say, if you missed it, here's the post about the Phantasm. So I think this last bit's really interesting because, well, first they say you'll get it on Consume Plasma, an unexpected place. I have to be honest, when I first read this post, the one thing I was wondering about, and the first thing I thought of, was Consume Plasma. If you guys don't know, that's if thieves steal from a Mesma and, you know, ghostly creatures, I guess it is in PvE, you can get Consume Plasma, which gives you all the boons in the game. And now that means thieves will get Alacrity. And a lot of thieves will sneer at that because they use initiative and don't care too much about cooldowns, but all your utility skills will benefit from that, and most importantly, maybe too, Steal. Steal does benefit from Alacrity, and Steal is an extremely powerful cooldown. So, you know, the Alacrity will help you a little bit there. Beyond that, also, Rangers will know that I think if they run a Sire Moth and a Pig, then they can forage and they can dig up plasma, ectoplasm, just anywhere, which any player can pick up and eat, which is another source of alacrity. But what I really want to talk about here is the conversion thing. So if you guys don't follow Guild Wars 2 closely enough to really understand this, there's a lot of play that goes on with boons. You can rip a boon off of someone, which just deletes it. You can steal a boon, which means, you know, if they have 25 might and you steal it, you have 25 might and they don't. But you can also convert a boon. Converting would mean that if they have Aegis, you flip it, remove the Aegis, and put on a condition instead, an equivalent condition. So Aegis becomes burning. A highly defensive thing becomes a highly offensive thing. I think might becomes weakness. I'm pretty sure that protection becomes vulnerability. So there's a conversion table for right now that is all the various boons into all the various buffs. Now that Alacrity is a boon, they'll be adding it on there. I think the most likely thing we'll see it swap through is Chill. So Chill currently is move slower, obviously, but also it reduces, or increases, sorry, your skill recharge. It makes them slower to get them back. Alacrity speeds that up. So I think what this means is whenever you convert Chill now, you'll get Alacrity. Or whenever someone has Alacrity and gets converted, that will turn into Chill. It's not really the Alacrity becoming Chill that I'm interested in, as much as it's the Chill becoming Alacrity. What this means, particularly for, like, if you think about like PvP and World versus World, if anyone has AoE conversions, it will mean that you're suddenly getting a lot of Alacrity around that's being given to you, even if there's no chrono around. And I think that's going to be really interesting. Also for raids, I think there are certain situations where bosses can take boons from you or flip boons. And that will be kind of weird. I think Zera has a mechanic, but as well, as you guys will see in a video coming up very soon about the Underworld, the final boss of the Underworld steals all boons from you. And so now that boss will be stealing Alacrity off of your team, which you're going to have. And I wonder if that will mess up boss animations and cause things to overlap. I'm not particularly excited about that because raids seem, and encounters seem very flimsy, and some timing goes off just a little bit, it could break entire fights. And not always in a good way, probably more in a frustrating way. So hopefully the devs have thought about this stuff, but that is very, very interesting to me, and adds a whole other layer to combat too when you think about, okay, do I want to actually be using a class that applies a lot of chill anymore? Again, Reaper is the big one that we want to think about on this, because they might flip that into Alacrity now, and that could help them grind us out over particularly attritive 1v1s and stuff. So anyway, I think that really is all some pretty deep stuff, and I'm quite excited about seeing go through with the game. So there you go, guys. That's a taste of what's coming on the balance patch, hopefully very shortly, and there'll be a very long and detailed discussion about it, I'm sure, on the channel once that is. Some other news as well with Guild Wars I'll quickly whiz through since we ended up talking about this for so long. First of all, the API, there have been some slight changes there, as you can see here on this post on screen. Lawton Campbell was the API dev. If you guys don't know, this is the thing that developers can hook into to provide stats about various players on their websites or tools. There's a Discord bot. There's Guild Wars 2 Efficiency is the sort of very famous thing that uses a lot of API stuff. And they say this: we want to catch you up on API-related news. Lawton, who has been very involved with the API community over the last many months, received a promotion that will require his focus in other areas. This deserves a big congrats, but that means that at the present time, we don't have a specific ArenaNet representative who will be reviewing your requests and bug reports or posting as frequently in the past. They say they do remain committed to the API, blah, 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 but this guy's... So basically, they're not actively deving the API anymore, which makes me really sad. I wish they would replace Lawton, but he was an amazing dev. Not many people in our community really interface with him, obviously, but the guy responded so quickly and was always very blunt about what he was going to work on or what he couldn't work on, what were low-hanging fruits. There's lots of other ideas I still had for the API that I wanted to see be done, and seeing that that's gone a bit on the back burner sort of stings a little bit, but there you go. They said that on the forums. And then finally, there was a live stream last night. A developer live stream where they talked about story behind the scenes stuff. There'll be plenty on that I'll talk to you guys about when I start my really deep dive into the POF and Living World story reviews. But one main thing, they did confirm a fan theory that the Herald of Balthazar is Devonna from the first game. That won't mean much to too many of you guys, but that was confirmed. I sort of feel like this is a conspiracy or hidden thing on the level of the Morgemoth thing. And they even talked about there were some hints in the combat log that they wanted to make, which Morgemoth also had hints on. I haven't talked to you guys about that just yet, but they did confirm that on the stream. And also, a big thing with marketing. So as you guys know, they have a fairly new marketing hire who wants to kick things up and do lots of exciting stuff. They're actually running a competition right now, a Guild Wars 2 competition where the main prize is to win a trip to the studio. A trip for 2 to the studio. And it's to do with friendship and community, and it's basically share to the world any friends you made in this MMO or any, you know, SO you may have had. You know, we see posts on Reddit sometimes, people get married in the game or whatever. It's a competition around that. So if you're into that idea, there'll be a link in the description. You guys can go check that out in detail. And yeah, it's nice to see the devs have a little bit of an initiative like that. Obviously, I've just come out of the back of one of my own. And yeah, hopefully this will get the word out about the game in one way or the other. So there you have it, guys. Bit of news. Back to raiding stuff very soon, tomorrow. And keep your eye out for the balance patch. I'll tell you guys as soon as it goes live. And what are your thoughts? Obviously, I'm keen to know, especially if I missed something, on the Phantasm changes, on the clone changes, on the Alacrity stuff, or even confusion and regeneration. Cheers, everybody. Hope you're having a great day, and I'll see you very shortly.